airplane.
Lively and unrehearsed, we welcome you into another edition of Moral Side of the News. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. As always, is a distinguished panel with me today. Reverend Jason Crosby, Center College. Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition. Rabbi Gaylia Rooks, Rabbi Emerita Gaylia Rooks, the Temple, and Father Tony Smith, Archdiocese of Louisville. Our first topic today, 5 Americans are home, 4 men and a woman, detained for years in Iran. They arrived home this week after being held hostage. It was a controversial swap by President Joe Biden. He agreed to release nearly $6 billion in frozen Iranian assets. Republicans say the administration is helping boost the Iranian economy at a time when Iran poses a growing threat to American troops and Mideast allies. But others say these swaps have gone on in Republican administrations as well. So turning to our panel on Moral Side of the News panel, let's hear your thoughts on this money for hostages swap.
Well, there's been a long history of controversial, sometimes contradictory exchanges between America and Iran. That goes back to the 1950s, of course. And most famously, most of us probably remember the hostage situation in 1979, probably most famously. And that had to do with hostages that were taken from American diplomats that were there, that was left in Iran once the then Shah left the country and escaped to America. And in response to that, retaliation of that, they took those hostages. America was a despised entity there because they had propped up the Shah there in 1954. They was involved with Britain disposing the prime minister back in the 50s. So it's a long, complicated history. Fast forward to 79 again, of course, it happened under the administration of Jimmy Carter, who tried without success to get those hostages released. And then they waited until the very day he got out of office and released them under the Reagan administration. And then, of course, after that, he fast forward a bit further. Under the Reagan administration, there was the so-called Iran-Contra issue where there was money. The United States sold arms to Iran. Iran was supposedly kind of an enemy of America, but yet still they sold arms to Iran to help finance the Contra in South America. Which in turn, many have concluded was involved with the dumping of crack and drugs into Los Angeles. So there's a long, complicated triangle of mischief, mayhem, and with great contradiction. And also, the United States used to be a supporter of Iraq against Iran. So it's really a long, convoluted, odious history there. So in my view, this is not much different. It's a continuation of sorts. So nobody can throw rocks at either side, political side, because they all have been involved in the complicated history with Iran. One thing for sure, I know that those persons there were there probably on business. Could be, some may say probably for monkey business. I don't know what was going on there, but they were people of privilege. Poor people don't go to Iran and do anything. So for that exchange to take place to save these, citizens, and with those funds being released back into Iran, I have to agree, sad to say, with the Republicans, feeding money back in the economy can only help them do the mischief they have been determined to do over a long period of time. So I think it's probably, in my view, limited view, more of the same. We just the last episode of that complicated, convoluted, contradictory history of the U.S. dealing with Iran.
Well, if I may, when you look at a moral issue, trying to come to a conclusion, you have to look at different aspects of the outcome of such, and proportionality is one thing that you have to look at. If you have a decision between what is good and what is not good, obviously you do not do that which is not good. But when you have effects that maybe both are good and maybe both are not good, proportionality comes to bear, that you have to decide which is the greater evil, which is the better good type thing. In this scenario, the only thing, I don't know about yourself, Clay, or anybody else on the panel, but the only thing I know of the issue is what we're being told, okay? And you have certain individuals on the political scheme who say they oppose it, certain ones say Okay, I'm sure those who oppose the giving of $6 billion, which by the way is their money, not our money anyway.
Right. I think that's an
Yeah,
important
that's an
distinction
important
to
thing, right.
make.
But if someone says, well, still, the greater good, well, that's a very utilitarian way of looking at it, but talk to the families of the victims. You'll get a different scenario there as to what is the priority. My comment is I really don't know enough about the issue. Yes, in all things considered, I wouldn't want that regime to be built up more, but someone said, well, why are they, we have confiscated their money, they confiscate people. Well, they don't have any of our money to confiscate, so what do? They confiscate our people. And is it a kidnapping, paying for it? I don't know, you can call it what you want to call it. But we'll have to wait and see that, they're supposedly set up guidelines that says the money cannot be used, et cetera, for this, that, and the other. But then that's just replacement money. They can, not use.
I'm not sure that's really true, because the money is for humanitarian aid, but they're not feeding their people.
Well,
in America, that might
may be
true.
the case. My point is, if they're giving $6 billion and we're saying you can't use that for this is for the people, fine. If they were feeding in any way, shape, or form, and any money that was spent going to their people, they can now replace that with the $6 billion. That's another issue itself. But my point is, what I'm trying to say is, I'm not sure that anyone can read into the future to see this is good or bad. And so I'm going to withhold my judgment until we see what's going to happen down the road if they, they do use it for building the atomic bomb or whatever this nature. That's going to be a major issue for us.
And I wouldn't doubt that that will happen. But theoretically, it's only to be used for medicine and food and humanitarian aid. Well, from a Jewish moral perspective, freeing the captive is one of the highest, most righteous things that a person can do. Freeing the captive is something that, there's just so much history on that. I don't want to get into all of it, but there was a time in like the 1600s, early 1700s, when the great age of exploration, and pirates would kill the other people and save the Jews, because they knew you didn't even have to return them to where they were from. You bring them to any Jewish community, and they knew that the Jewish community would pay the ransom. And to free the captive is a great commandment and a great honor to be able to do that. And the whole Jewish community of wherever they were would pool their monies together to be able to ransom them. So, in our modern age, we say, well, doesn't that encourage them to do it more often? Well, on the one hand, as I mentioned, if you weren't Jewish, you were more likely to be killed because you didn't have any value. And
Any cash value.
Right. Well, they used to say that a Jew was second only to a golden doubloon or something in its value. But I think more to the point, it's the saving of the life, it's redeeming the captive that really, really matters. And people who are willing to kidnap, take hostages, they're going to do that. I mean, if they are bent on evil, then they will do that. And in our modern age, whatever form of terrorism it is, I mean, if that's what they have their hearts set on, it's going to happen one way or another. So, coming from that perspective, I'm just thrilled that they were able to do this. And you read what these people said. I was afraid that we'd just be forgotten, and who would really care enough about us to make this miracle and gain our release. And I'm just not always proud to be an American. No, certain issues that are going on, but to me, this was a righteous deed.
Well, Tony, you mentioned the issue of proportionality in making decisions and how difficult it can be, especially when we are pontificating from so far and we don't have all the facts in front of us. But one other moral, ethical question that comes to my mind in a situation like this, is the question about the literal value of human life. How much is human life worth? And I think that on a regular, ongoing basis, our society, systems, and structures within our society do assign value to lives. And unfortunately, far too often, it is a value that is not of great significance.
Correct.
Certainly, in this particular case, we're talking about $6 billion.
Right.
And the reality is that I think one of the things we struggle and wrestle with from a moral perspective is that we really cannot place value on human life. There is not a monetary figure that can be assigned to any individual human life or their freedom in this case that we can identify. And so that is an ongoing struggle and tension that we have. And I celebrate, and with Gaylia, any time that we can step back and recognize the pricelessness of life is worth our time. And I think the more often we can do it, the more that we can match high value with tangible human life and liberation, I think it serves us all well. One other thing I would note is that in addition to this not being the first time that this has happened in terms of United States-Iranian relationships, this is more of a common occurrence than perhaps we realize. Just recently, Brittany Griner, the WNBA basketball player who was detained in Russia, her release was negotiated, and there are still others being held captive in Russia. If I'm not mistaken, the State Department has roughly a list of 20 countries where American citizens are encouraged not to visit for this very purpose. So this is not as isolated of an event as I have a tendency to think.
Of course, we're all looking at this issue from our perspective. But you're talking about people will kidnap. Well, as I understand it, the Iranians are thinking of the people who were released from our jails were kidnapped by the federal government as well. Depends on whose ox is being gored and what you look at. But that's the matter of politics. But I agree with you. To an extent, is there a value of human life? I would say it's valueless, like you say. It should be always raised. But that's not the case. I mean, whether we say it or not, we do place a value upon human life, and sometimes, as you say, it's not that great. But nor should it be, in a sense, one sense. Is human life, we do not see human life as as an absolute. If we saw it as an absolute, then anything being asked, we would try. But no, there's a certain limit, as we see in our medical field and see in ethics, whatever it may be political. Yes, some people are saying those folks should still be there. The folks in Russia still should be in Russia, type thing, because the utilitarian approach, the greater good, would be for them to remain as they are.
One thing you mentioned that my first job out of college was with an insurance company, Aetna Insurance, as a matter of fact, and they perfected the art of putting a value on human life.
Sure.
That's their business. And the problem with a capitalist society, we know the price of everything, but the value, the true value of nothing. So we're gonna put a price tag on something. And the insurance company is an industry based on putting a dollar value on human life. And being a American descendant of slavery, of course, my ancestors came here based on that principle, that it was based on a dollar value for this life. So having said that, this country has always, mankind worldwide, but this country has always been wrestling with coming to grips with that reality. But it seems that always the rich has a greater value than the poor. I think when Christ came, he was trying to balance the scale, in the Jewish tradition as well, trying to balance that scale. That the rich always, the haves always are worth more than the have-nots. There was an incident, I think, over in Uganda, a woman who had responsible for the death of many children. They're focusing on her as an individual, as the center of the story, and not focusing on the individual nameless lives of the children that died. So the poor are almost always the nameless, the valueless, if you will. So I think that that's always a question of proportionality. We don't always get equality,
No.
Right.
but there should be some level of equity, biblical equity.
Well, biblically, it is
Right.
equitable. I mean, you have to do justice whether a person is rich or poor.
Right.
You don't favor the poor just because they're poor. You
Right.
certainly don't favor the rich just because they're rich. You have
Correct.
to do justice.
Nor or discount the life of someone because they're poor. So I think that's always called. I think this whole episode with Iran kind of brings that whole debate back to the forefront.
I was just curious, if I may, just real quick. How long was that money held by years, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
2019, I
Yeah.
believe.
Well, my concern is, I mean, it's locked in.
Who gets
but
the interest?
That's the point. I
Really?
mean, did they apply for interest, and if so, who gets it?
Well, we're trying to still get reparations, my people. I'm keeping hope alive. So I'm submitting not just a voice, but an invoice.
Talk about interest.
Right, with interest.
With
Yeah,
interest,
So
right,
I'm with you on that point. So,
All right, I'm sorry.
So
All
that-
right,
that
well,
has merit.
we're off to a good start on Moral Side of the News. Thank you for watching and listening. We have a second topic. It's a little closer to home, right here in Jefferson County. Thousands of students are absent from Jefferson County Public Schools every day. According to a Courier Journal article, about 37% of JCPS students were chronically absent last year. That means they missed at least 10% of the school year. Since the onset of the pandemic in 2020, 35,000 students have missed out on significant school time. So, panel, turning to you, what can be done to get this back to a normal number?
well, we talked about, I'm going to say this in, those children are worth a dollar amount in the school system.
Right.
Every day they come to school, they're worth something. And every day they're absent, they're worth something.
And there are very few states that pay based on attendance rather than number of students enrolled.
Right.
Kentucky is one of the few states that does that.
That does what, based on attendance?
Based on attendance.
Attendance. So every time they're present, then they're accounted for in the accounting department.
So when they're not,
So it
Right.
affects the bottom line.
But I would hope that what we care about the most here is if they're missing 10% of their education, and I don't believe it's 10% of their education, so much of it builds, and you know, when you're especially in math,
so you think it's more?
I think it's more because if you fall behind in your math classes, if you're missing certain classes, you know, and then you come back and it's harder to understand, and so maybe you're not quite getting as much. I think it has a cumulative effect. But the real question is, why has this number skyrocketed? The obvious answer has to do with COVID, and I think I think it will take a long time before we really understand and can make a difference in the lives of these children in terms of really how psychologically damaging COVID has been for these kids.
You asked the question of back to normal, get back to, if you just go on the internet, of course, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true, but just look at, type in books dealing with the effects of pandemics. You have hundreds of books listed. There's a fellow, I forget his name, I shouldn't bring it up, but he has done a study from Athens, and you know, if they use the bark of the tree where we get aspirin from, it would have, but almost 3/4 of Athens was destroyed by bacterial infection. And his conclusion is every time you have a pandemic, everything about humanity changes. Politics, education, religion, everything changes. And we're still in the midst of coming off of a pandemic.
Are we
Yes.
coming off?
Well, I've been seeing more and
Off
more
of the
cases.
Are we coming off a
reported.
pandemic?
We're coming off of a pandemic.
You
I
say
don't
it's still
know.
here.
Right here
You're
in
still here.
Louisville. Here we are
Well-
back in the studio for the first time in years,
First time.
and COVID
Jill
is,
Biden just had another case in the last couple of weeks.
Well,
Jill
and
did.
here in Louisville.
but I'm going
It's-
from what like the quote medical experts who say this is something that it's not when we talk about pandemics, we're talking about the millions and millions of people dying.
Okay, so we're
talking
endemic now.
endemic.
Okay.
We go a better way. Thank you. But we're at the point where we still don't know how do we get these kiddos back? Pandemic for sure, yes, but why aren't they coming back to school? Why are they having anxiety? Look at the TV and you'll see school shootings, you'll see violence, you'll see bullying. That also impacts why a child maybe would not want to go to school. I don't think we really know. You know, the information sent to us, there's all kinds of possibilities. But the ability of the JCPS or whoever it is to try to reach out to these kiddos and find out what's going on, I think we still are too close to the issue to really understand how we get them back to any sense of normality.
Well,
And not only, just one more sentence, not only is it their education that has suffered through the pandemic, but their social skills.
Correct, right.
I mean, their ability to socialize. You know, my grandson just
That's
turned
vital.
4, and he, this was his first birthday party where he had people there.
Well, and I think that what we are seeing in terms of school attendance is one bit of evidence that we can quickly and easily see and quantify because kids are in school. But I think it's indicative of a larger societal reaction that you're mentioning, or a larger societal response to what we have been through. I sense, and I have 2 children, a middle school aged JCPS student, an elementary school aged JCPS student. In addition to what's happening within the schools, is that on the home front, in the workplace, there has not been a return to a rhythm and routine of life that existed prior to the pandemic, that was set up so that the school day was a natural part of it. People are working at times that are distinct and different. More people working online, working different shifts, working different hours than ever existed pre-pandemic. How then does that affect a household ecosystem when it comes to the rhythm and routine of what was a school day that was established based upon an agrarian culture 100 years ago? And so I don't know the answer. I don't know if that is a significant component. I suspect it is. I think we're still learning and growing. What I do appreciate, what I think is so invaluable and important, is the fact that JCPS does have many, I believe in articles that I read, 25 or so
25.
individuals that are going to families' homes.
Right.
To try to help.
And they are trying to address this issue not from a punitive standpoint, which has been the traditional response, where there is punishment for student and family for lack of attendance, but from a holistic point of view.
Right.
I don't know the answers. I don't know the root causes, but my strong hunch is that to address it immediately, it's going to take that kind of holistic approach. And a system that might defund the schools because of lack of attendance, that might then lead to fewer folks going into homes to address these problems, that worries me at a larger macro level. But I do think at the moment to have that kind of support
Well,
in
you know,
place is
these persons
so
going home,
significant.
I would hope that they're doing it because of benevolent reasons.
Of course.
And they're not debt collectors, functional de facto debt collectors
Good
going
point.
there to account for these children that are missing in action. Whereas when they used to have truant officers, they may call them truant therapists now. So it may change. They may have a softer approach to tracking them down and accounting for their presence or lack thereof. So it's forcing everyone to change how they approach, how they talk. The language will change. Their needs are changing. The whole thing has changed, like Tony said. It's just everything has changed, and they may have to just change the way they talk about it, they go about it, and they are about it. So, but it is a reality. There's a reason why they're not going to school. We just started off. We just started school. Now that first week was a reason enough to scare people away. You talking about the boogeyman? That was enough to scare people because that was trauma. These are little bitty children.
Yeah.
Going to school for the first time, first grade, second grade, who was stranded on a bus until 10, 11 o'clock at night, going to the restroom on themselves. That was trauma. Yeah. So it just rearranged everything, and I think that we're seeing just more fallout of traumatic transformation.
But I would be like with yourself. It's good that they're investigating. It's good that they're attempting to do something here.
And
rather
hopefully listening more
listening
than,
more. Correct.
right.
So less truancy and more help.
right,
Less punitive and more help.
right. Well, we need to understand it. You know, and there could be, I'm sure there are many different reasons why different kids are missing, and you know, different age groups. And I mean, there's a whole. This will be a lot of grist for research for PhD candidates coming down the pike.
Well, and I think one thing to note is that roughly 2/3 of students come from households in JCPS that are impoverished, and how that
That's a big number.
exacerbates the situation within JCPS.
That's criminal in and of itself.
That's a
That
big
needs
number.
to be addressed.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left. I'm going to end with a completely different topic here. We've all seen pink flamingos on front lawns, but it wasn't one of those plastic birds that was spotted on the Ohio River near Louisville. Instead, it was a flamingo believed to be from Mexico, displaced by a recent hurricane. Panel experts predict the bird will head south soon. As our weather turns to the fall, what are you looking forward to in fall, as this is the first weekend of fall?
I'm just curious, is this bird walking?
Yes.
Yeah.
They
It
said
It was
it's
right in the water.
Healthy.
It's
healthy.
hobbling a little bit, but it's walking.
Right,
But
right.
flamingos do
Modeling.
fly. They do fly.
They do
Oh
fly.
yeah, they fly.
So
Feeding
they
itself,
don't like
so.
more likely flew here from the hurricane.
Probably the winds brought it.
And it ate crayfish versus shrimp it would
Right.
get in Florida. Crayfish,
Right.
crawfish, I would say.
We've all heard stories of it raining frogs and raining fish and all this stuff.
Cats and dogs.
Cats, well, not so much
No.
cats, but it seems that a lot of this does occur when the hurricane
Oh,
type thing gets
you
up.
meant
I
really? I was talking about the
really-
expressions.
No, I mean, really.
Okay, gotcha.
But it's obviously if the birds were in the wrong place at the wrong time and the hurricane hits, you know, they're going to go where the wind goes. So
So it's the first weekend of fall. What are you looking forward to this fall? The weather changes. Here we go.
I like to see.
I'm trying to move back in my house. I'm moving as we speak. So I've
Oh,
been
you're
out
good.
of my house for almost 2.5 years from a fire. So I'm looking forward to falling into my own bed
Yay.
this weekend. So
Congratulations.
first time in 2.5 years.
Well, given the last few weeks that we've had weather-wise, I'm looking forward to some rainy fall days. We could use some rain.
Right.
But in addition to that, I do enjoy spectating, watching some football. 'Tis the season. And I will be trying to keep up with my children running cross country this fall. So those
good.
sorts of fall athletic
Seasonal.
events are enjoyable for me.
Gaylia, how about you?
Well, there's all these fall holidays. We just had the New Year, Rosh Hashanah coming up. Sunday night and Monday will be Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Then comes Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, is that what? And the Fall Harvest Festival, where we're commanded to really be appreciative of our blessings, especially our food, and to share it with others. So I'm hoping that will really. Plus, there's another holiday after that. Rabbis don't like the fall. We're thrilled when fall. No.
A good way to end our moral side of the news. Jason Crosby, Clay Calloway, Gaylia Rooks, and Tony Smith, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching and listening to this program, Moral Side of the News. We'll be back again with an all-new conversation